here today to document the history of Sharpe Missionary Baptist Church. Miss Lyda Hill, on our 50th anniversary, documented the majority of our history in this booklet. And so I would like to start with reading a passage of that, written in one of Brother L.R. Filson's journals. In 1951, Brother Elmer Collins held a revival in the garage building at Sharpe. It lasted a week and there were large crowds. Perhaps it led to the starting of Sharpe Missionary Baptist Church. I'm Natalie Fowler Johnston. My grandmother and grandfather, C.H. Fowler, Clarence Henry Fowler, and Sarah Owen Fowler, set out in their garage in 1951. It was visioned to have a church in that area. In 1951, they held a revival in what was my grandfather's garage at that time. And they cleared the floor, got it cleaned up enough to have a crowd, and they had a rather large crowd at that revival. That was probably the beginning of the church there in Sharpe. What later would be, in 1952, the beginnings of Sharpe Missionary Baptist Church. They didn't have, at that time, a Baptist church in Sharpe. This land was later purchased from Marshall and Colleen Rickman, who was a very prominent family there in Sharpe. Their son actually was Tommy Rickman that wrote The Coal Miner's Daughter. I have gone there all of my life with the exception of 8 years. And when I was 17 years old, I felt the calling to go play the piano at another church who did not have a piano player at that time for about 8 years. And then I returned back to Sharpe Missionary Baptist Church when my second child was born, Jamie Renee Johnston Moore, and we have been at Sharpe ever since then. That was in April of 1987. I started playing the piano when I was 6 years old. I did not play at Sharpe until I came back after Pam Hawkins stepped down. My father, Robert Fowler, was one of the first baptisms there in the church, and he was baptized there in the pond out back. The pond is no longer there. Upon the death of my grandfather and grandmother, the farm was sold, but the new existing life center is actually on part of that farm, and the church did buy that part of the farm, so we do have some of the farm even there. It started with a bunch of people that absolutely loved the Lord and felt like there was a need for a Baptist church in this immediate area. The first pastor was L.R. Filston, Brother L.R. Filston and Elsie Ray Filston. There were 2 charter attendants according to this booklet, and that was Lyda Hill as well as Robert Fowler. I'd like to call attention to this lady because she was the root of our church. Miss Lorraine Hodge was born with several deformities. And in some people's eyes, she would be a very disabled lady. Miss Lorraine lived in a little tiny house there in front of the church, and she was very independent. Her mother had what few thought was been very harsh to her, but taught her and led her to be independent. She was our Sunday school secretary. Although her hands and fingers were all fused together, she had some of the most beautiful handwriting that we've ever seen. She was a good lady. She, when upon her death, there were 3 ladies, my mother, Nadine Beasley, and Frances Holt, that had helped care for her. There were very few things that Miss Lorraine could not do, but peeling potatoes and curling her hair for church were 2 things that she could not do. So my mother, Nadine, and Frances would go and help her do those duties. I know my mom, Bobby Fowler, would go over and help roll her hair on Saturday night so she would have curls the next morning. But she, when she died, she gave those ladies what little money, she gave in her inheritance. And those ladies gave that money back to the church and donated for our current piano that we have today. There is a placard on the piano where Miss Lorraine's name is, so that everyone would remember and recall that this dear lady was one of the reasons that we have that. This is our old building. This was what it looked like from 1955 to 2001. We did at that time have a parsonage, and our parsonage is now the parking lot because we grew. We also, in the association one year, we literally had flags designed of what exactly we as a church would stand for. And I actually drew this design, and they made a flag into it, and we've still got the flag. It says, "Christ is the answer for a dying world." On May 19th, 1996, this is one of our bulletins, and my husband was actually the song leader at that time. You know, you hear funny stories about the pianist always running off with the song leader. Well, it was family. What was you going to run off with them for? I'd like to go over a few of the pictures that I have in front of me, and then we'll talk with my dad and my aunt.
Yeah, your mom, that'll be a trick.
My mom was also a member when she married my father, but she has since passed away.
You're just about a magician, but not that magician.
This is a picture of my grandfather and grandmother on their 55th wedding anniversary. That was held there at the church. My grandfather was also a deacon in the church, and Daddy was a deacon up until about 10 years ago. Because of his health, he stepped down. And so I guess he would be what you would call a deacon emeritus now. In finding pictures, we did find this picture. This was done actually 10 years before the church was formed. And this was my grandmother and grandfather, as well as 3 of their children. We also have a 4th child that was added, and that is Winnie Robine Fowler Castleberry. And she will be in the interview today. But this is the picture of her about the time that they probably started in the church. She has been more of a sister to me than an aunt, because she is only 10 years older than me. She was the baby of the family. My grandmother served as the nursery director forever, and this is a picture of her holding one of her great-grandchildren. I also found a picture of the original piano that was in the old sanctuary that I think you said Miss Bertha or Beulah Wilkins, is that correct? Bought it.
Lena Metcalf.
Lena Metcalf, okay, bought the piano. But this is the original piano that started in the church. We do figure that this picture of my father is about the time that he was baptized in the pond out back. And then his senior picture was this. And a funny story, Dad was paid. I got to looking at the church minutes one night, and I was so enthralled with the interest of them that I stayed up most of the night looking at them. But when Dad, when they had the church in the garage, Dad was actually, you might say, the proprietor of everything before the services. And so Dad was actually paid $6 a month to get the church ready, whether it be summer or winter. In summer, he would get all the windows open and set up all the pews, which were basically, I think, stumps and boards. And then in the winter, he was to make a fire and get the church building all warm and snuggly, so when they came in, they would be able to worship then. I do have a picture of one of my grandfather's first mission trips with the Blood River Baptist Association up in Ohio. After he retired, he made many mission trips to Mexico as well as Peru with the Wycliffe Bible College. I did find a Vacation Bible School certificate also that my mother had kept from Vacation Bible School. That was another thing that I remembered last night. One of my fondest memories was Miss Gertrude and her having the cookies for Bible school. Miss Gertrude would take and wrap 2 cookies up in the napkins, and you would get 2 cookies and Kool-Aid when you went through, and it would never fail. She had her whole big tray of cookies and the sugariest Kool-Aid you ever could imagine. But it was her faithfulness that I always remembered. Brother Ray, her husband, Brother Ray Melton, was my song leader for a number of years. And no matter what I did, no matter how awful I played, Brother Ray was still a big support to me. When I first started playing the piano there at church, I knew 2 songs. What a Friend We Have in Jesus and We'll Work Till Jesus Comes. That's all I knew. And if Brother Ray didn't sing those 2 songs, I literally could not play them. I was too nervous to play. There's a song that said, in the day it said, for such a worm as I. And when they changed it for such a one as I, Brother Melton, I could always count on him having that worm fly up in the middle of it, and we would laugh. When I was playing, I would look at him and hear him sing the worm, and he would be beet red and laughing because he knew that he had sang it wrong. Jack Martin, who was a missionary in Mexico, accepted the call of the pastor as pastor of the church in April of 1972, and he resigned in November 4th of 1973. And a funny take on that one, I thought about this as I looked at my report cards last night. Brother Jack Martin's wife, Joan, was my 5th grade teacher. And I was a little rambunctious 5th grader and didn't care what my writing looked like at all. And I got a D in writing. And my father and my mother came in and flocked in on me because not only because it was the D in writing, but it was the pastor's wife that gave me the D in writing. So needless to say, I have a very pretty handwriting today because of Miss Joan Martin and the D in writing. Another member that sticks in my mind is Brother J.T. Holt. When I was about 12, Brother J.T. had even though he did not have children of his own blood-wise, he had grandchildren and 2 children that he raised with his second wife. And he had a heart for children. And we took on the bus ministry. We would go every Saturday, and we would, anything that had a bicycle, a swing set, or anything like that, we would go and find these children to bring them to church. And at one point, we would bring 75 to 100 kids into church on that bus. And we would always, after we got done with our visitation program, we would stop by the Flat Top Grocery, which was owned by 2 of our members, Dorothy and George Houseman, and we would get a Coke and a candy bar after we would get done with that. But he was a very godly man and had a very big heart for children. I personally have taught Sunday school. I've led youth there. I've been the church clerk, and it's kind of a funny story. I took the church clerk at Sharpe Missionary Baptist Church thinking that the girl that had it, I would be the assistant. And she would never leave, so therefore I wouldn't have to worry about doing it. But she left, and so therefore I ended up being the church clerk now until current time. We now have Brother Chris Moore. He came on as the youth pastor, and then when Brother Jeremy Short resigned, Brother Chris felt the calling to be our senior pastor, and he has been a marvelous man. He has taken us through several ups and downs. As you know, when any church is growing, Satan is always around the corner. When we went into the building, we had probably about 350 there in our service at that time. Brother Chris, after 6 months of him being our pastor, we had 350 in attendance after six months of him being our pastor. Brother Chris has continued in this ministry, and as he says on Sundays, he's seen many of the kids grow up and have kids of their own.
Worship, it's good to see you this morning on this resurrection morning and Easter morning that we celebrate the resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And
Brother Chris is a very humble man. Brother Chris is a pastor, a friend, and a preacher. You don't find that often in a pastor now. He's just a good God-called man.
What he has done for us, confessing he is the Christ. Have you done that? Have you trusted him? If not, why not today?
I'd like to now turn this over to my aunt and my father. My father is Robert Fowler, and this is my aunt, Winnie Fowler Castleberry.
But I hate to say anything, it would sound like bragging. God has drugged me through a lot of places in this church And it's nothing that I have done, it's just what God has done through me. And like I say, I started out as janitor, and I have done everything, held every office in the church except pastor, nursery leader, and the I forget what they call the upper aged ladies now, but I didn't teach that class either.
Joy class.
Yes.
Everything else I've done, from janitor up. And I would say that I have enjoyed the trip all the way. I love serving where I served. I love being served where I was being served. I feel God was behind it. And I hope my feelings are correct. Weedy?
Well, I think I will tell off on myself. When we were in the garage building, they let the children go out to a tree close to the building, and we would play drop the handkerchief, ring around the rosies, duck, duck, goose. But I was very young in my early years, and I think the reason why they did was because I was too noisy of a child.
When you were at the first church in the garage, what was that service like? Like, what do you remember about the church service? Did they have an order of service? In the garage particularly?
I was watching what I was getting on the floor that I was going to have to clean up.
Okay. Winnie, do you remember any? Of course, you had said about the plane.
Oh, but I also remember Brother Filson would be preaching along and get quieter and quieter and quieter. And then he would make his point very loud.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he could pray for 30 minutes.
That was another thing I remember about my grandfather. He would pray the most eloquent prayers, but it was so funny. You knew that he had read the Paducah Sun paper at that time because he would pray for every event that was listed on the headlines. And his dad said he would pray very long. You know, you knew if they called on him to preach to close or to pray to close the service, you were going to be there for a little while. You know, Brother Ed Downs, I remember his prayers too. They were always God sent. You know, it was like he was talking to God, and he and God were the only ones in the room, as well as J.T. Holt. J.T. Holt had the most wonderful ability just to strictly pray. And it was like him and God in the room. We do have a member like that now that I even feel like is that way, is Ron Boatwright. Ron Boatwright, it's just him and God, and they're just talking. And that's what prayer should be about, you know. Over the years, I can think of many, many things. When we were outgrowing the building, I can remember we had several visitors coming, and we had actually gone to 2 services, and I would play for both services. Well, this visitor asked me, said, you know, was that your husband that you sat by in the church service? Well, I mean, many times I didn't have a seat beside Mike. Mike would be somewhere in the crowd, and there was such a crowd that I couldn't tell where he was, and I would just sit down, and I had actually sat by my cousin that day instead of Mike, and so I told her, I said, no, I said, that wasn't my husband, that was my cousin. But I can remember, even though we were overcrowded and having 2 services, there was a friendliness about our church. And that's what I think we always have had, is we love the Lord and we love people, and we try to express that in welcoming our visitors, you know. And I would like to always think that they thought we were a loving church. And I try when I'm going to the piano, I don't want anybody to ever think that I'm a stuck-up piano player that never, you know, wants to visit with the crowd. I try to make that a purpose of going around and talking to the visitors, you know, so that they will know that I do care, even though my role as piano player, I do take that seriously as well. What were some of your fondest memories of the church?
I don't know. I guess the time I had with Ed Downs, and what he taught me, church-wise and masonry-wise, as masonry as in wall, not club. He taught me how to lay blocks, and by that I was able to build a one-story structure up on the hill.
What I remember about Mr. Ed Downs the most, though, was his handshake.
Yeah.
As Dad said, he was a bricklayer for a living, and he built many of the houses there in Reeland. But when you shook hands with Ed Downs, you knew you were shaking hands with a man that did work with his hands.
Yeah.
His hands were big and they were rough because of the masonry that he had done all his life. The cement had a hard effect on his hands, but he had a very, very firm grip. I'll never forget at my wedding, he and Eileen came, and as he was going through the line, he looked at my husband and shook his hand and held on to his hand for the longest time, and he said, "You take care of her or I'll take care of you." Were there any annual events or celebrations or traditions that were unique to Sharpe Missionary Baptist Church that you all can think of? We were talking last night, and the only thing I could really think of was the homecoming, but Dad said those are in every church. So
Yeah.
We always have the homecoming, the third Sunday of May, always.
Yeah.
And traditionally, and this is not what we have had now. Traditionally, you would have a group come to sing. A former pastor would preach the sermon, and you would have dinner on the grounds. Can you all think of anything in the early days that were different then?
I wish we'd go back to that.
Back to what?
To having the singing and the former preacher preaching,
After service, okay.
and then dinner.
What about you, Aunt Winnie?
Well, I remember that at sometimes we didn't have a place inside to have our lunch, and we would have dinner really
On the grounds.
on the grounds out back of the church.
Right. Are there any stories or lessons from the church past that you think are very important for us to remember in the future? Any stories that you feel like need to be passed along? Or any thoughts?
I can't think of any stories. I can think of some people.
Okay.
Ray Melton, Gertrude.
They were part of the backbone of the church.
They were.
Those two should be in every church that's ever.
I agree. Any others?
Ed Downs and Eileen.
If you all could pass one message along to the younger members of the community about Sharpe Missionary Baptist Church, what would that be?
Got to say it. It needs to be fun, but it needs to be fun in a religious direction. If it's not, if it's not God-led fun, it's not right.
I agree.
It's not supposed to be in this. It's supposed to be happy, enjoyable. And it can be. Those that say that it's got to be stiff and rigorous and all this, no, it don't got to be that way. It's got to be fun and
So you say that they need to base their activities and things biblically.
yeah.
Okay. I can remember Brother Fred Richardson. I don't know if you two remember Brother Fred. When we were working with the youth, he would say, the message has not changed, but the methods had to. And he said, if you have to feed them pizza to get them to know about Jesus, feed them pizza to get Jesus.
Yeah.
But always add Jesus there.
Yeah.
And Brother Fred Richardson was a great man in our county. And he was very good with it. And we also have Brother Mark Sickling, too, who is now our Director of Missions at Blood River. And I truly feel like Brother Mark has probably been one of our best mission director. I know he's the best one that we have seen on the field.
Yeah.
I mean, he is strictly in our churches and at our churches, and they're willing to help, as well as going on many of the mission trips with them. And I think that we have actually, preserved a part of what a missionary Baptist should be. And the missionary Baptist, actually, we support missions through our cooperative program. That's where the missionary Baptist comes from. Whereas other Baptists, which we call independent Baptists, and it's not as relative today as it was back maybe 20 years ago, but they support missions as independent. They support their missions. They have 2 or 3, whereas we support the cooperative program through the Southern Baptist Convention and Kentucky Baptist Convention, where that we serve some 50,000 missions over around the world, and that's, I think, something very important for us to know, that when we as a church give to those organizations, we are supporting that many ministries. There was one particular ministry too that Dad and I were talking about last night. We used to do caroling every year at Christmas time, and there was one particular member, and you had to love her, Miss Stella, and Miss Stella would turn the light on. When we would get up there, we would all get there together, and we would get ready to sing, and someone would knock on the door. Well, Miss Stella would look at us, turn the light on, look at us, hear us sing for a minute, and turn the light off on us. But all those memories is what makes Sharpe Missionary Baptist Church so important to me. I do feel like that I have a purpose in keeping it open. Not only for the Lord, but because of a family history. As I said, I've always looked up to my father and my mother. My mother was a godly woman also, and I'm sad that she's not here today with us. Dad worked swing shift, the majority of our lives, and I was always in church. You didn't have to ask, were you going to church? You were there. I learned the grits and the stories in my Sunday school program. That's where, and I've taught Sunday school since I was 18 years old, Now, even as a teacher, I teach the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I don't have anybody on Sunday. And that's a shame, because we have several, young people that age, but they don't see Sunday school as a priority. I think that's where we fall short, And I'm not saying, I'm not saying it's, anyone in particular. I just feel like my kids, they don't drive themselves. So therefore, if the parents, don't drive to church for Sunday school, the kids aren't going to be there also. Dad and them always had a certain pew. Now he sits on the back row with his sitter and comes every time the doors are...
I like to be out of the way.
And Aunt Wendy, she moves, and I never can tell if she's there or not because she moves every Sunday. I have one particular seat that I set up on the front so I can get to the piano.
I get 3 or 4 hugs every day when I go in. And my little girlfriend, Carla.
Yeah, he's got a girlfriend, Carla Alexander.
And thinking about this only gift that really matters. Because without what we talk about this morning, really there is no other gift that matters.
Brother Chris has taken us through many times when we were looking for a pastor after a very troubled time. We were not comfortable. We did not trust a lot of men that had come to the church and actually did sermons. And when we talked with Brother Chris and my husband simply one Wednesday night said, Chris, has the Lord led you, to lead? And we had all been praying for the right man, and the right man was there all along. And Brother Chris has, like I said, been a blessing. Over the years, I can remember, you aren't a pastor if you weren't in a 3-piece suit. Now, Brother Chris gets up in a Western style shirt and jeans every Sunday to preach, and that's fine.
The greatest thing that anyone needs is forgiveness of sin.
I remember him saying that he went to the hospital one time, and I forget the need, but I think one of the young ladies had been in a car accident. He had been fishing or taking care of his cattle, and he jumped in the car and took off because that's where the need was. And when he got there, he had no t-shirt on and his jeans, and someone said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm her pastor." And they looked at him and said, "Well, you don't look like a pastor." And he simply told him, "So this is what the Lord called me in." So I guess he thought I looked like a pastor. So I think sometimes we don't think about things like that. And I think that's something that we need to treasure, is that we can all be Christians. We don't have to we have to look like Christians, but we don't have to dress the part. On and off throughout the years, my husband was the song leader. Dad had been the song leader. Brother Ray Melton was the song leader. What is it like for you leading singing with me on the piano?
And you covered me, I covered you. That's the way it goes.
Do you have any thoughts or feelings about knowing that it was your daughter, the founder's granddaughter, still playing the piano at the church now?
Yeah, hey, well, just the person that God wanted in the hole.
Okay.
And that's the way I've always played the game.
Okay. What about you, Aunt Wendy?
Well, it's funny, but I remember that sometimes your husband and you didn't get the same song together.
Yes.
That he would be ready to sing one song, and you'd look at him and say, "No, we're singing such and such number."
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it, we'd all laugh because
only in a little country church can you do that.
Yeah.
It was funny.
It was quite funny when they started talking about building the new church. I remember, and this was all said in fun. I said, "Well, now if you are going to build a brand new church, you're going to have me one of those big fancy pianos, because that's what all big churches have." Never thinking that I would have the baby grand playing that I am playing now. But because of those 3 ladies who dedicated their lives to Miss Lorraine, they donated the money to buy that piano. But I can remember, I don't remember a time that I haven't always loved playing, I did not like lessons, and Pam Hawkins Miss Edna Jessup was my first piano teacher. And even then I felt a nurse calling because her husband was sick in the front room. And I would go and talk with him. And I actually had more fun talking and taking care of him while Miss Edna led the other people in piano lessons than I did actually do the piano lessons. I did not want to play what they wanted me to play. I wanted to play church hymns. And I do play by note. Miss Pam Hawkins made sure that I played by note and that I added extra things to it, but many people think that I don't read music, that I just play by ear. But I do, I put the little bump in Christian music that should be there, I don't feel like we ought to be playing and singing "I'll Fly Away" like we're going the other direction.
Do you remember who was the first pianist for our church?
The only one I can remember was at our Emma Lou.
Yeah, but I believe before Emma Lou was Shirley Shaver
Okay.
Severance.
Yeah.
And she could put the in the songs too. And I thought that's where you got your putting the in the songs.
I just like to play, and I love to play, I like to play it joyfully. I also now have a young lady, Michelle Murphy, who is able to play for me. Many times I didn't have anyone to cover, so whether you were sick or snowing or whatever, you went to church and you played. There was a time earlier in this year that when I was sick that I did not, Satan was really moved in, and I had a horror of even actually playing. And the Lord has taken that away, and I'm back to playing, and my health is better. And that was a very dark place to be, because I knew where I needed to be, and I was too nervous and lost all my self-confidence as well as my self-esteem to want to play. And the Lord took care of that. I want to thank you for doing this today, and I want to thank Jason for taking the time to do this with us. This will be something that hopefully they'll cherish for a number of years.